Good evening. Good evening. Higher education is often criticized for failing to perform platforms for diverse political views. Tonight we are here and we are pushing back on that perception. I'm Justin Schwartz. I'm proud to be the Chancellor here at the University of Colorado Boulder, and I am so happy to welcome you to our campus and the 78th Annual Conference on World Affairs. John Bolton and Susan Rice are two of the most consequential foreign policy leaders of the 21st century. Both served as U.S. National Security Advisor, and both served as U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations. Either credential alone commands respect. Together, they mark careers that will be studied and debated by historians for generations to come. Both advised presidents directly on war, diplomacy, alliances, and global crises from very different governing philosophies. One a staunch Republican, one a lifelong Democrat. Tonight they debate the question, is the United States in the process of committing superpower suicide? We have one vote. Many of you in this room likely disagree, perhaps deeply, with at least one of our speakers tonight. And yet you are here to listen. That spirit, open inquiry, civil discourse, and the exchange of ideas across differences is the fundamental role of universities in the United States and exactly what the Conference on World Affairs was created to advance. At the University of Colorado Boulder, we believe democracy depends on our willingness to debate hard questions with rigor and with civility. Tonight, that belief is alive and visible. I want to thank all of you here tonight for joining us and reaffirming our democratic values. So now please join me in welcoming Taylor Jaworski, the Interim Director of the Benson Center for the Study of Western Civilization and Associate Professor in the Department of Economics. Thank you.
Thank you, Chancellor Schwartz, and good evening, everyone. As the Chancellor said, my name is Taylor Jaworski, and I'm the Interim Director of the Benson Center here at the University of Colorado Boulder. For those of you who don't know, the mission of the Benson Center is to promote the understanding of the ideas, institutions, and interactions that have shaped Western civilization, and in the spirit of tonight's event, to foster intellectual and ideological diversity on campus in the form of debates, conversations, and lectures by leading academics, public intellectuals, and policymakers. Tonight's event could not be more timely, and I'm very happy that the Benson Center could partner with the Conference on World Affairs and the Steamboat Institute to make it happen. We are about to see a debate, and a debate has a resolution that the Chancellor said, and I'll remind you of it all. Maybe I'll get a few more votes. The United States is in the process of committing superpower suicide. To speak on either side of this resolution, we are fortunate to have two people who have spent their careers at the heights of the American foreign policy establishment, Ambassadors John Bolton and Susan Rice. And as a little introduction to the event, a few days ago, I heard the host of one of the proliferating New York Times podcasts comment, and I'll paraphrase, that all questions about the future of foreign policy can be answered in one of two ways: China or artificial intelligence. It would be easy enough for these answers to come up tonight, and they very well may. Will the 21st century be a unipolar or a bipolar or a multipolar world? How much is the national security strategy of the second Trump administration a break from the past? Who will win the race to build the most sophisticated artificial intelligence systems? And how will that race shape what happens on and off the battlefields of the future, or indeed what we call a battlefield? These questions have been and will continue to be relevant. We don't appear to be at the end of history. But tonight's debate is particularly timely because 44 days ago, the United States and Israel began an effort to destroy the military capabilities of Iran, to decapitate its regime, its leadership, among other perhaps more ambitious objectives. These last few weeks seem to have only accelerated the debate and discussion in this country and around the globe about America's role in the world and whether this is the new birth or the waning days of American power. I hope everyone is looking forward to what we have in store tonight. My last task is to introduce the person who leads the Steamboat Institute, an organizer and co-sponsor of tonight's event, Jennifer Schubert-Aiken. Jennifer is the chairwoman and CEO of the Steamboat Institute, which she co-founded in 2008. She is on the advisory board of the Benson Center and also serves on the board of directors of Rebecca's Angels, a nonprofit organization helping children with post-traumatic stress disorder. For this Boulder crowd, it's also worth noting that she's a 3-time finisher of the Leadville 100 trail race. And ran the Boston Marathon 31 consecutive times. Please welcome Jennifer Schubert-Aiken.
Thank you, Taylor. It's always so fun to be back in Boulder. It's great to see this room full. We really appreciate all of you coming out tonight. Thank you, Chancellor Schwartz, also for your opening comments. I couldn't agree more with everything you said. The Benson Center has been a valued partner of the Steamboat Institute since we held our very first Campus Liberty Tour debate here in Boulder 8 years ago this month. That debate also featured a capacity audience of nearly 1,000 people to hear Nigel Farage and Vicente Fox debate nationalism versus globalism. And it was the same night as the men's NCAA basketball championship game. So people in Boulder really come out when we have something important for them to hear. I also want to thank all of those who are watching the live stream because we sold out tonight. Many people are watching the live stream, and I know we have people watching from all over the country, so we welcome them. And I would also just like to say it really, truly is an honor to be part of the 78th Annual Conference on World Affairs, and I know you're set up for a great week of speakers and panels. Steamboat Institute was founded nearly 20 years ago with the mission of promoting America's founding principles and fostering an appreciation of the freedom we enjoy as Americans. We have hosted dozens of debates on college campuses all over America over the past 8 years, visiting more than 30 campuses. A few of those include Harvard, Princeton, Cornell, the University of Maryland, University of Tennessee, University of Texas at Austin, Arizona State University, and many more. With each of our debates, the emphasis is on using critical thinking skills and learning how to think, not what to think. As our nation approaches its 250th anniversary, the greatest threat to American self-government and liberty is the collapse of civil disagreement. Our republic cannot survive if its citizens no longer know how to disagree with one another without trying to silence one another. Steamboat Institute aims to address this problem with our Campus Liberty Tour. Our debates fearlessly tackle the hottest topics of the day, including the U.S.-Israel alliance, climate change and energy policy, DEI policies, socialism versus capitalism, transgender athletes and women's sports, and many, many more. And we are proud that over all these years, not a single one of our debates has ever been shouted down or canceled. Tonight is the fourth of 5 stops in our spring tour. So far this spring, we visited the University of California at Davis, our hometown of Steamboat Springs, and Pepperdine University in Malibu. And in June, we will wrap up the spring tour with a debate at the University of Wyoming, which will be part of the Heterodox Academy Mountain West Regional Conference. With all of our debates, you can watch live from anywhere in the country on Steamboat Institute's YouTube channel, so we hope you'll sign up for our email list at steamboatinstitute.org, have the viewing link sent directly to your inbox. And of course, all of our previous debates are available for free on our YouTube channel, so please check those out. As a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, Steamboat Institute relies on the support of many generous individuals and foundations to bring programs such as tonight's debate to campuses across the country. I would like to extend a special thank you to our major sponsors, the Adolph Coors Foundation, Diana Davis Spencer Foundation, Lined and Harry Bradley Foundation, Jack Roth Charitable Foundation, the Anschutz Foundation, the Tina Snyder Foundation, and Bruce and Marcy Benson for their support, which has allowed us to expand this program to more than 30 campuses across America. For much of the past century, the United States has played a central role in shaping the global order through its military strength, economic influence, alliances, and support for international institutions. Yet today, there is growing debate over whether America's own choices at home and abroad are strengthening that position or gradually undermining it. Critics argue that rising debt, political polarization, retreat from global leadership, and challenges from rivals such as China suggest a nation in decline, potentially hastening its own loss of influence. Others counter that the United States remains uniquely resilient, with unmatched strengths in innovation, alliances, and military capability, and that talk of superpower suicide misunderstands both history and current realities. We invite all of our audience members, including our live stream viewers, to respond with your view on this question. Is the United States in the process of committing superpower suicide? Agree, disagree, or undecided before the debate begins using the QR code provided. So this is one time we encourage you to bring out your phones. Use your phone to scan that code. The more of you that vote, the more meaningful the poll results will be. Then, after the debate is over, we're going to ask you to vote again to see how opinions have shifted. So you can see, I'm looking at the monitor down here, currently 81% agree with the resolution, 5% disagree, and 14% are undecided. So as you continue to vote, you will see those numbers fluctuate. So please do vote so you can be part of the fun. And then if you vote, please be sure to vote again at the end so we have a good representation. All right, it's now my great pleasure to introduce our speakers and moderator for this evening. So let's welcome them to the stage, and I will then introduce each of them while they remain seated, and then we'll get right into our opening statements. Arguing the affirmative on tonight's resolution is Susan Rice, an author, scholar, diplomat, and policy advisor. Her 30-plus year career in public service has spanned 3 presidential administrations. From 1997 to 2001, Ambassador Rice served as U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs. In this role, she was instrumental in enacting the African Growth and Opportunity Act, negotiating the resolution of the war between Ethiopia and Eritrea, supporting the progress of democracy in Africa, and building African peacekeeping capacity. From 2009 to 2013, Rice served as U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations and as a member of President Obama's cabinet. At the UN, Ambassador Rice advanced U.S. interests, values, and prosperity, including by achieving multiple rounds of sanctions against North Korea and Iran, authorization to use force to protect civilians in Libya, and restoring U.S. leadership on human rights. From 2013 to 2017, Ambassador Rice served as National Security Advisor, where she played a central role in achieving many of the Obama administration's signature initiatives, including the Iran nuclear deal, the historic opening to Cuba, the nuclear security summits, advancements in global health security, and the Paris Climate Accord. From 2021 to 23, Ambassador Rice served as domestic policy advisor to President Biden, leading efforts to expand access to affordable health care, reduce prescription drug costs, increase the value of Pell Grants, and craft the first ever national strategy to counter anti-Semitism. Ambassador Rice is the author of the New York Times best-selling memoir, Tough Love, My Story of the Things Worth Fighting For, and is the only person to have served as both National Security Advisor and Domestic Policy Advisor. And I have to add, her niece, Kiki Rice, was just tonight selected in the first round of the WNBA draft. So welcome, Ambassador Susan Rice. Okay. Arguing the negative on tonight's resolution is John Bolton, a lawyer and diplomat who has served in 4 presidential administrations in his 40 years of public service. As the U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations from 2005 to 2006, serving in the administration of President George W. Bush, Ambassador Bolton strongly defended American economic and security interests, as he did throughout his time at the State and Justice Departments, first as U.S. Assistant Attorney General and later as Undersecretary of State for Arms Control and International Security Affairs. During his tenure as U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Ambassador Bolton was a leading voice on the need for the UN Security Council to take strong and meaningful action against international proliferation and terrorism. Along with France's ambassador, Ambassador Bolton led the Security Council to approve a unanimous resolution to end the summer 2006 Hezbollah war on Israel, to authorize UN peacekeepers, and to create an arms embargo against Hezbollah. As White House National Security Advisor in the first Trump administration, Ambassador Bolton championed a strong and resolute U.S. foreign and defense policy. He oversaw the U.S. withdrawal from the 2015 international nuclear deal with Iran, which was reached under President Obama. He was also deeply engaged in key policy formulation and strategy regarding North Korea's weapons of mass destruction, strategic arms control related to Russia, and on China. He is the author of The Room Where It Happened, a memoir of his time serving in the first Trump administration, which was published in 2020. Please give a warm Colorado welcome to Ambassador John Bolton. Our moderator for tonight's debate is Carine Hajjar, opinion journalist and editorial board member at the Washington Post, where she writes about politics, immigration, higher education, and the Middle East. Carine previously served as a columnist and editorial board member at the Boston Globe. In 2022, Carine was the Joseph Rago Memorial Fellow for Excellence in Journalism, working on the Wall Street Journal editorial board. And in 2025, Carine was awarded Steamboat Institute's Journalism Fellowship for Public Policy and American Exceptionalism. Carine frequently provides commentary on cable news networks, including Fox and CNN. She is a graduate of Harvard College and is based in Washington, D.C. And now I will turn it over to our moderator.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for being here. This is quite a crowd, and I'm really thrilled for the conversation ahead, so thanks to both ambassadors for being here too. It looks like people are already submitting their answers for the pre-debate poll. Be it resolved, the United States is in the process of committing superpower suicide. You can indicate that you agree, that you disagree, or that you're undecided. And then throughout the comments and the back and forth today, you'll have the chance to submit your own questions, and I'll be monitoring those on the iPad. So make sure if anything comes to mind that you submit that. So let's get into it. I want to invite Ambassador Rice to give her opening remarks.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. I think from now on, I'm going to make it simple and just abbreviate my bio to be Kiki Rice's aunt. super proud of her. She's going to the Toronto Tempo as number 6 draft pick in the first round, along with 5 other of her UCLA teammates, national champion UCLA teammates. Anyway, I'd like to thank the Steamboat Institute, CU Boulder, our guests, our moderator, and my colleague, Ambassador John Bolton, for joining in a respectful debate on the status of the U.S. role in the world. On the question before us, I will argue strenuously in the affirmative. Sadly and dangerously, the U.S., under the current administration, is indeed in the process of committing superpower suicide. America's post-war superpower status has been predicated on at least 5 key pillars of strength. First, our military might and prowess. Second, our economic power and dominance. Third, our global network of allies and partners. Fourth, our domestic strengths and resilience. And fifth, our soft power, meaning the power of our ideals, our example, our attractiveness to other peoples and nations. On each of these 5 dimensions, we are far weaker today than we were even 18 months ago. We are witnessing what I believe to be a deliberate dismantling of America as a global superpower and our systematic shrinkage to a regional great power. Let me briefly take each of these 5 pillars of superpower strength in turn. First, military might and prowess depend not just on our expenditures, but also on the quality of our investments, our people, our strategy, and decisions. While this administration has proposed vastly increased military expenditures, it's failed to invest in military modernization or modernization of the defense industrial base, and it's dangerously depleted stockpiles of key weapons systems. It's installed a deeply unqualified and immoral leader at the Pentagon who has purged highly qualified general officers and flag officers based on political bias, especially bias against women and minorities, and fired the Army chief in the middle of a war, all of which served to undermine merit-based U.S. personnel in the military and its apolitical nature. The administration has eliminated many of our judge adjutant generals and their position and hollowed out the office at the Pentagon that deals with the law of war. It's adopted a national security strategy that prioritizes the Western Hemisphere at the expense of confronting our principal adversaries, China and Russia. And now, the administration is in the midst of waging a reckless, costly war of choice in Iran that has successfully degraded Iran's missile and conventional capabilities, but has cost American lives and wounded. It's badly damaged our bases and embassies throughout the region. It's revealed the vulnerabilities of U.S. military and political leadership. It's ushered in potentially a more radical Iranian leadership, not regime change. And thus far, Iran has benefited economically from this war due to higher oil prices, choking off the Strait of Hormuz, exerting tolls, and achieving sanctions relief from the Trump administration. Russia has also been a big winner for many of the same reasons. And meanwhile, Americans are suffering vastly increased costs of oil and gas, fertilizer, and other key inputs. And Iran retains its nuclear stockpile. Secondly, our economic power and dominance have diminished due to unpredictable tariff policy, which has increased inflation and cost U.S. manufacturing jobs. The one big, beautiful bill has increased the deficit and inequality. Incoherent policy and attacks on the independence of the Federal Reserve have significantly weakened the value of the dollar and eroded its standing as a global reserve currency. Limits on legal immigration and mass deportations have harmed key sectors of our economy, from agriculture to construction, healthcare to high tech. Thirdly, our allies and partners. This administration has nearly destroyed our European alliance and badly damaged our Asian alliances through tariffs, through threats to seize Greenland and annex Canada, by refusing to provide military and financial support to Ukraine and pressuring Ukraine to capitulate to Russian demands, by renewing threats to leave NATO and denigrating allied governments in Europe and providing support to right-wing extremist parties throughout Europe. The prime beneficiaries of all of this are Russia and China, who've long sought to weaken U.S. alliances. Fourth, our domestic strength and resilience, which is vital to our international power, has suffered as the United States has squandered its scientific and technological leadership by decimating cuts to NIH, to cancer research, to universities and R&D, and the blocking of global talent. We've actually assaulted our own leadership in artificial intelligence, including by designating Anthropic a supply chain risk and selling H200 high-quality chips to China. And we're crippling our competitiveness in technologies of the future, particularly clean energy. At the same time, Americans are facing reduced access to affordable health care, cuts to food assistance and education, especially for the most vulnerable, and attacks on vaccines and public health, alongside the rollback of basic environmental protections. Finally, our soft power has long been a source of America's strength. But this administration has abandoned the United States' commitment to democracy, to development, human rights, and the rule of law abroad by dismantling USAID and the Voice of America, withdrawing from the World Health Organization, the Paris Climate Agreement for the second time, and more than 60 international organizations, while demonstrating a blatant disregard for international law, attacking votes off of Venezuela, attacking Iran, and threatening to wipe out an entire civilization, which is genocide. Domestically, this administration has abused power and assaulted the judiciary, media, law firms, universities, DEI, and political opponents, leading to the rollback of core freedoms of speech, association, and the ability to avoid illegal search and seizure. They've arrested lawful immigrants and visitors, resulting in a steep reduction in foreign travel and foreign students in the United States. Violence by ICE and CBP, including against U.S. citizens, plus the unlawful deployment of U.S. military personnel in American cities, have horrified Americans and foreigners alike. And finally, massive corruption is now standard operating procedure for U.S. leaders, their families, and cronies. In sum, this administration has deliberately and systematically weakened all 5 core elements of U.S. global power. Tragically, the United States is in the process of committing superpower suicide. Thank you.
Well, my thanks to our hosts and all of you for coming at the conference and to this event. So it's a great pleasure for me to be here. Let me just say, the United States is not committing superpower suicide so far. We have made multiple mistakes since the end of the Cold War. None of them fatal, but mistakes that have pervaded both political parties, and in some respects are reflected by Trump just as a continuation of prior mistakes. I'll just take 2 as examples. Beginning with the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, we, along with many other Western countries, believed, having reached the end of history and seeing before us nothing but a peace dividend, radically reduced defense expenditures. We have never recovered from that mistake. Even after 9/11, we didn't recover adequately. And the downward trend in defense expenditures continued right on through with a brief blip upward in the first Trump term, back to going down. This idea that somehow defense expenditures could be cut has become so irresponsible that we now face problems that were simply unforeseeable at the end of the Cold War. And it is a problem of both parties. Trump has asked for a significant increase. We'll see whether he gets it. But this has been tied directly to a consistent misreading of Russia and what was going to happen after the fall of communism, with both parties in varying regards misunderstanding Russian nationalism, misunderstanding what was going to come next, misreading Vladimir Putin, who in 2005 said unmistakably that the collapse of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical tragedy of the 21st century. Now, I think it was one of the greatest ways to end the 20th century, but that obviously wasn't the view of enough Russians to come to dominate their policy. And Putin reemphasized that later in 2007 when he basically said his goal was to recreate the Russian Empire. The mistake of misreading Russia has permeated our policy consistently since then. It failed utterly to deal with Russia's aggression against Ukraine in 2014. It failed to deal adequately with Russia's defense capabilities during the first Trump term, and it failed miserably again in the Biden administration during Russia's second aggression against Ukraine. And needless to say, it's still failing today. That failure across administrations of both parties is going to be a problem for years to come, and relates directly to the second problem, which is a 35-year, 40-year-long misreading of China. Even when the Chinese abandoned Marxist economic principles in substantial part in the mid-1980s, we didn't see that it was for a purpose. In fact, our commentators and political leaders said that this was just wonderful because what would happen? China would, number one, become a responsible international stakeholder and would assume international responsibility, and number two, would become more and more democratic. And we believed this right down until the present time, and we were wrong on both counts. Chinese economic growth did not make it more responsible internationally. It was not a peaceful stakeholder. It was not engaged in a peaceful rise, and it most certainly did not make China a more democratic society. Xi Jinping is the most autocratic ruler of China since Mao Zedong, and its policies domestically and internationally reflect this misreading across all administrations, including the present one. The fact is, we didn't understand two critical developments in two nuclear powers that were our major adversaries. And so when you look at all the things that happen on a day-by-day basis, just bear in mind that we've borne the burden of making those mistakes for a long time. Now, while we are not committing superpower suicide, Trump certainly is committing political suicide of his own. He fundamentally doesn't understand international relations. He thinks everything depends on the relationships between leaders, heads of state. He's obviously wrong. He has just demonstrated how wrong he is by attacking the Pope, claiming that he elected the Pope because they wanted an American. And then putting out a social media meme showing him, I can only describe it as Christ the Healer, which at least a few people in the United States still consider blasphemous. This is the kind of behavior that will ultimately bring Trump down and make him, I think, one of the worst presidents in American history. We are suffering, don't applaud that. We are suffering undeniable by his mistakes, but it is not superpower suicide. He is an aberration and will pass from the scene. Thank you.
Well, thank you both. A reminder to everyone to keep submitting questions, and we'll do another poll when the Q&A is over here. But I want to start off by asking, we're talking about superpower suicide. I'll start with you, Ambassador Rice. What should it look like? What does the U.S. as a superpower look like? What should it look like? We've heard a lot in recent years with the rise of more isolationism in our country that we don't want, that some folks don't want America to be the world's policeman. But you're arguing that, you're affirming that the U.S. is a superpower and is now in decline. What does that look? What should it look like?
What should American superpower look like?
Yes.
Well, the United States should be, I believe, actively engaged in the world to advance our own security and prosperity. There is no such thing in the 21st century as a country that can put up walls, figurative or literal, and expect to be able to prosper and secure itself because of the nature of the threats we face, which are, many of them are global in nature, whether we're talking about terrorism or pandemics or climate change or, as Ambassador Bolton pointed out, the efforts of our adversaries to defeat us. And so we need to be, in my judgment, a strong, prosperous, democratic country that respects its own people and respects other people's and gives the world a kind of leadership that is, that I would best term enlightened self-interest. We have to act obviously in our own self-interest, but I believe it is in our self-interest for other countries to want to partner with us, to be our friends, to be our allies, and for other peoples around the world to be able to grow and prosper and become more free and have their human rights respected. I do not believe that we must view ourselves in zero-sum terms when it comes to the rest of the world. I think we do better when other peoples prosper and are more free, and when they want to join with us in reducing conflict, increasing security, making our populations more prosperous and healthy. So that's, to me, what American leadership should look like. Obviously, we have fallen short, not just now, but I think it's fair to acknowledge Ambassador Bolton's point. We've fallen short in many different ways on many of those dimensions over the course of generations. And yet, we have been better at achieving that ideal at certain times rather than others, and certainly we are not doing it now.
Ambassador Bolton, I'll pose the same question to you. What does the U.S. as a superpower, what should it look like?
Well, I think for much of the post-1945 period, we were doing the right thing. But it came to be seen by many people that we were doing more abroad than we were concerned at home. And that was a feeling which I would describe as an isolationist feeling that exists in both parties. It's characterized in different ways, but it's a virus that affects the political system. And I think what's important to understand is what forms the basis for our peace and security around the world. And we do benefit from peace and security in the world. We benefit commercially, we benefit in many, many other ways. And in recent years, throughout much of the West, among our closest allies, people believe that peace and security were provided in the world by what they called the rules-based international order. This is a phrase whose first initials are all capitalized, the rules-based international order. It's a fiction. It has never existed. If it did, the key people didn't get the memo. What has provided peace and security in the world since 1945, to the extent it existed, was American power and the system of alliances that we built. Many people said, but the allies, the friends, didn't contribute enough. And that's true. They haven't contributed enough. Over decades, they haven't contributed enough. But to be clear, we were doing what we did not out of beneficent charity for the rest of the world. We did it because it benefited ourselves. And we became afraid to say that. We became afraid to say that our policy benefited ourselves, which leads to Trumpism. And that failure, that inability to see that a strong America benefits not just others in the world, but benefits us, I think is a real problem people have to address. I'm not ashamed to say it. And if you're worried about it, then you're asking really for a weak America.
You brought up the rules-based international order. A couple questions on that. Let's start off with the UN. You've heard a lot of criticisms of the UN under this administration. To what extent do institutions like the UN strengthen or constrain U.S. power? And are there times where it's appropriate for the U.S. to bypass the rules imposed by the UN to preserve its own superpower status? I'll start with you, Ambassador Bolton.
Well, there are certainly times when we could use the UN effectively, but I think at the present moment, the key political decision-making bodies of the UN are hopelessly broken. The Security Council, the General Assembly, the Human Rights Council are utterly useless. That wasn't always the case, but it is the case now. There are other parts of the UN system, and part of its problem, it's so vast and spread out, that do good work. Many of the specialized and technical agencies, which are utterly unknown in the American public, when they stick to their knitting, don't get involved in politics, limit themselves to their functions, can be useful. But there are also vast swaths of the UN and the UN system that ceased being useful long ago, if they ever were. So absent some fundamental change in the structure of the UN to make it more effective, I don't think you can look to the UN really for help in really any major political issue at the present time.
Ambassador Rice.
Ambassador Bolton, what was your famous quote? You could knock off however many floors of the UN tower and...
Yeah, I said if you lost the top 10 stories of the Secretariat building in New York, nobody would notice the difference.
Right. So I succeeded Ambassador Bolton at the UN, one ambassador removed. And I think most people would assume our views of the institution are very different. And they are different in the sense that I think the UN is indeed, as Ambassador Bolton said, failing in the present, particularly the Security Council, which is the vital decision-making body. But I also agree that the specialized agencies, the UNHCR that deals with refugees, the World Food Program, many of the operational agencies of the United Nations do incredibly important and valuable work. But let's be clear about why the Security Council is broken. It's broken primarily, well, some would say for at least two reasons, but I want to emphasize the first one. The main reason why the Security Council is broken is because Russia and China and the United States, France, and the UK and France to a lesser degree, cannot agree at this point on anything. And because they each wield veto power, the institution is stuck, whether it's on the Middle East or Ukraine or any other issue of geopolitical significance, or almost any other issue. The other reason some would argue that the Security Council is dysfunctional is because they would say it doesn't adequately represent the interests of the rest of the world, particularly the developing world. And I think there's some validity to that. The challenge for the United States as a veto-wielding member is, do we want to exacerbate the problem that I just described with the key powers with veto-wielding authority, can't get along, can't agree, by bringing in others who might add to that chaos. So the UN is in a bad place right now, but where we might differ, and I don't want to speak for Ambassador Bolton, is my view is the UN is a mess, but we would be worse off without it. And the challenge is how to reform it and revamp it rather than to kill it. And Lord knows the reforming and revamping would have to be more than surgical. But we need a place, as we learned after the failure of the League of Nations, where where the member states or the nation states of the world can communicate, can negotiate, and can try to achieve outcomes that are broadly beneficial and serve our national interests.
I'll just make one brief point. One of our predecessors, Jean Kirkpatrick, was once asked if the U.S. should withdraw from the United Nations. And she paused for a minute and said, "No, it's not worth the trouble."
Well, what's your answer to that?
I think that was a pretty good answer.
Well, let's turn over to another sort of international institution or alliance. The president has had a lot to say about NATO in the last week. The administration's had a lot to say. What is NATO's role in advancing U.S. interests today? And what should we expect from our NATO allies? Should we expect, for example, that they would help us open the Strait of Hormuz, as the president requested? But generally, beyond that, what should we expect from them? Ambassador Rice, what do you think?
Well, NATO is the greatest alliance in human history, and it is a defensive alliance. And the foundation of it is an attack on one is an attack on all. The only time that Article 5, that provision, has ever been invoked was after the United States was attacked on 9/11. And our NATO allies and friends and partners from around the world joined together with us in our self-defense, in most obviously in Afghanistan. And, you know, you can say a lot of things about NATO. You know, it makes decisions by consensus. That can be cumbersome, particularly when a country like Hungary under Orban has a vote at the table. It has primarily served and largely effectively to deter Russian aggression against the members of the NATO alliance. And it is, along with our Asian alliances, the envy of Russia and China, which is why they have done so much to try to weaken and erode those alliances and separate the United States from our core allies. Yes, they ought to contribute more to our collective defense. That is why in 2014, under President Obama's leadership, we obtained agreement that all NATO member states had to contribute at least 2% of their GDP to defense spending. That then was finally not quite achieved, but mostly achieved by the time the 10-year window had expired during the Biden administration. President Trump came in, and now he said it's got to be 5%. And most of the allies, minus Spain, I believe, have committed to that. 5% is, you know, I'm sure Ambassador Bolton would say probably not enough. It's a lot, but it matters how it's spent as well. But the NATO alliance is a vital cornerstone, as I argued in my opening statement, of America's global leadership and our effectiveness in the world. It has benefited the United States undoubtedly, and any effort to weaken it redounds to the benefit of our adversaries.
Yeah, I agree pretty much with everything that Ambassador Rice, since we're being formal tonight, said.
Why don't we stop with that?
Okay, that's fine. But I think there are a couple comments that are important here. I think probably both of us over the years talked to NATO allies and said to them firmly, I'm sure, and politely, I hope, you got to spend more on defense. This is after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And years went by, and they'd nod and not do it. The reason the 2% GDP spending target was set in 2014 was because Russia invaded Ukraine. And the Europeans said, damn, that's close to us. But by the time Trump's first term began, they still weren't close to it. In the NATO summit in Brussels in 2018, when Trump spoke, I didn't know when he opened his mouth whether he was going to withdraw from NATO right then and there or not. Because he doesn't understand the institution, he doesn't know how it functions. He thinks basically we defend Europe, they don't pay for it, and we don't get anything out of it. If I believed that was the way NATO worked, I wouldn't be in favor of it either. But it's not the way NATO works. But that speech prompted a number of reactions from European leaders, importantly tonight from Mark Rutte, then the Prime Minister of the Netherlands, now Secretary General. And he said, after Trump spoke, he said, you know, people have come here and said 2% for years. Obama did. He'd come and say, spend 2%, blah, blah, blah. Then he'd go back to Washington. We understand what you're saying is different. What is it about the European allies that it took Trump humiliating them, insulting them, threatening to break up the institution when nice, polite people like us asked them to spend more and they wouldn't do it? I find that disturbing, because the lesson it tells people is that unless you act like Trump, nobody pays any attention to you. Where were the Europeans when they should have seen the need to do this? So that is a fault, I think, that still remains unanswered, and it says to me that there are dangers ahead. And I do think, Susan is exactly right, NATO is a defensive alliance, but to say, as many Europeans did, Iran is not our war, I think misses the strategic reality of the threat that Iran poses. And that is another problem that we're going to have to deal with, whether in NATO or outside of it.
I would just add that, you know, speaking about Iran, if there were a genuine effort to involve NATO allies in the war on Iran, what they would have done is gone to the North Atlantic Council, that's the NAC, where decision-making is made within NATO, and made a presentation about the threats and the proposed response, and sought to enlist NATO allies' support. There's a mechanism that we've used many times to do that. Instead, the administration, you know, ignored the allies, surprised, you know, everybody with the nature of their attack on Iran. No consultation, no discussion of international legal authorities or even domestic authorities, and then demanded that the allies come clean up the mess. And, you know, it's not far from the first military adventure or excursion, as I guess we're now calling them, that have not come with NATO allies, and Vietnam obviously is an example of that as well. So I think, you know, alliances are built on trust, and they're built on mutual respect, and yes, they're built on everybody pulling their weight. And I don't conclude, by the way, that the reason why the allies have pledged, they haven't done it yet, they've pledged to go to 5%, just as they pledged to go to 2%, but actually most of them got over that 10-year period to 2%, is not because of Trump's crazy and bluster, but because they belatedly have recognized what John just said, which is that they face a very proximate and real threat from Russia.
Let's turn to some recent events, of which there have been plenty. Starting with Iran, I'm wondering if you think, now here's something that I'm going to venture to say you guys probably don't agree on, but striking a deal with Iran. Is there any way to reach a tolerable Iran short of regime change? Is diplomacy possible to get the type of Iran that preserves U.S. interests? Or is regime change the only option? I'll start with you, Ambassador Bolton.
Well, that's been my view for about 20 years. And I think the record in between has borne it out. And I think dealings with Iran, including beginning during the George W. Bush administration, proved the wisdom of comment that Churchill once made about the confirmed unteachability of mankind, that when you're presented with threats, you don't act early enough, and indeed, in many cases, you don't act until the jarring gong of survival sounds. And that was the course of events with Iran. As it attempted to develop nuclear weapons, as it increased its support for proxy terrorists around the world, and without any effective response. The behavior of the regime never fundamentally changed. There was never any evidence they had made a strategic decision to give up the pursuit of nuclear weapons. And indeed, they built a deep state that was designed to be impregnable, particularly once they got nuclear weapons. And to me, it's a matter of simple logic. If a regime that's hostile to the United States can't be persuaded or forced to change its behavior, unless you're content to live with the threats, regime change is the only option. I don't think that's what Trump is doing. I don't know what he's doing. I thought regime change might be his objective, but I can tell you I did my best to persuade him in the first term and failed. So what he's trying to do now, I'll leave for others to judge. It's a complete jumble, I think, even inside his own brain, and that is the proximate reason why we've got so many difficulties that we face now. Not difficulties that can't be overcome, but difficulties he basically created.
I don't think anybody in this room would argue that we wouldn't love to see a different regime, a democratic, government that respects the will of the Iranian people, that didn't pose a threat to its neighbors and beyond, if that were achievable at a reasonable cost. But if we've learned anything, and I guess we haven't, is that regime change through the barrel of a gun virtually never works. And it definitely never works without a ground invasion. And I don't think that from a U.S. national interest point of view, regime change is essential to achieving our core interests. Our core interests are, first and foremost, preventing Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon. By the way, that goal has been achieved to date. Does not have a nuclear weapon under the 2015 nuclear agreement. We extended the breakout time, that being the time that it would take Iran to have enough enriched uranium should it decide to race to a bomb, from weeks to a year. It's now back to weeks since the withdrawal from the nuclear deal and Iran no longer adhering to its obligations, which it was until the 2018 decision in the first Trump administration to withdraw from the nuclear deal. We need to prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon. We have not achieved that through current efforts to bomb the bejesus out of the country. The enriched uranium remains deeply buried after we already obliterated it, apparently last June. And we have a regime through our military action which is certainly not any better than the prior one, and arguably worse, because we have a supreme leader now who's 55 instead of 85, and whose father and close family members were killed by the United States and Israel. So, if regime change could be accomplished effectively through, means that don't exceed the costs that I believe the United States ought to bear, I wouldn't be against regime change in Iran. I'd be for it. But the fact of the matter is, it's not being achieved militarily. It wasn't achieved without military action. It can only be achieved through the Iranian people themselves. And we are far from that. And so we need to be in a position to achieve our core objectives, the nuclear weapons, the missile threat, the regional proxies, through means other than regime change. And I would argue through means that are far more rational, less costly, and more sustainable than military action. And that is through diplomacy. And, here we are after all of this insanity, back to the Iranians and the Trump administration are seemingly haggling over the period of suspension for a potential for the nuclear program, at least if you believe the press reports of today. So if and when this war ends, and eventually it will, I believe, end at the negotiating table. And I would hazard with not a substantially better outcome than the ones we've had in the past, if at all better.
Ambassador Bolton, I want to give you a chance to address the idea of regime change. How far do you think the United States should go to advance regime change in Iran?
Well, you could have done a lot better from the beginning by making what I think is a very compelling case to the American people that regime change was necessary for our national security. Trump didn't do any of that. You could have as a corollary, built up support in Congress, making the same arguments, and he didn't do that either. He could have consulted our allies, as Susan said, through the NATO allies, through the NAC or whatever other mechanism, but he didn't consult the Gulf Arab allies who were going to be critically affected by this. He didn't consult our allies in the Pacific, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, others that get a good percentage of their oil out of the Gulf region from different producers. And worst of all, he didn't consult with or aid the opponents of the regime inside Iran, particularly because he had ruled out the use of substantial American ground forces. The regime is deeply unpopular. I think it's before the attacks began, at its weakest point since it took power in 1979. Across the board, among young people, among women, among the ethnic groups, and among the entire population that are suffering economically from the catastrophic mistakes of the regime. The demonstrations that were so brutally repressed in January were fundamentally about the disastrous state of the economy. And that could have been mobilized, not to go out into the streets indiscriminately and get killed brutally by the regime, which, by the way, if you want to know how they would behave toward us when it came to it, when they're that willing to kill their own citizens, how do you think they'd treat the denizens of the great Satan? But you need to work on that. You don't start it automatically after the hostilities have begun. And I think all these things are still correctable, but it's not going to happen unless there's a clear articulation of what the strategic goals are. It could be, as some have theorized, that the regime is so weak, and I do believe it's much weaker than it was before, that there'll be a slow motion collapse over the course of the next year. That's possible, but I also think that it's unacceptable now, clearly, for the Gulf Arabs to live in a situation where the hegemonic power in the Gulf is Iran. They're just not going to tolerate that. So that adds the Strait of Hormuz issue as a third threat from Iran, in addition to the nuclear threat and the terrorist threat that has to be dealt with, and the current regime in Iran is not only not going to renounce it, they're going to try and make it stronger.
Yeah, I mean, we've gotten to the point where we have made this an existential matter for Iran. And, you know, as John said, when you're dealing with a brutal regime that's willing to kill tens of thousands of its own people, it's willing to do whatever it takes to stay in power. And that could include trying to race to acquire a nuclear weapon and or purchase one from somewhere abroad. So we are, as a result of, you know, a sort of, I'm trying to think of the polite word, half-assed effort to, you know, to sort of poke the bear and bomb the bear, but not, you know, not change or kill the bear. And we've emboldened it and made it willing to act in ways that are even more dangerous and unpredictable.
What could we have done differently? If we were starting from scratch, what should this have looked like? What would have been your advice?
Well, I tried to describe that. I mean, I think I come from the position that if regime change is going to be the goal, I want it to succeed. And I think it's a big mistake not to appreciate how deeply the regime has been hurt. It may still be there, but it has been decimated at the top. And the damage that's been done inside Iran, on top of its already flat on the ground economy, I think has been very substantial. I think this regime is weaker, and I think it's at this moment when fissures and cracks appear at the top of the regime that further pressure, like blockading the entry or exit of any traffic to Iran that would bring its oil to market, is going to have a devastating effect. That's what we ought to be focused on now. I'm not sure, because Trump sees everything as a deal. If he could figure out a way to declare victory, which he's already tried to do in various ways, declaring, for example, even though regime change may not be his goal, you know, we have changed the regime. This is going to send a signal to Russia and China that could induce them to take advantage in Ukraine or with respect to Taiwan. that notwithstanding Trump's use of force, he's not willing to see it through to a conclusion. Winston Churchill was once asked about the Suez Canal crisis of 1956, to which this episode has been, in my view, erroneously compared. But Churchill said, talking about what the British and the French and the Israelis tried to do to take over the canal, he said, I wouldn't have dared it. But if I had, I wouldn't have dared stop.
I mean, the regime is undoubtedly weakened and weak, but it's also, as a result, more dangerous and less constrained, less capable, but less constrained. And now with the blockade, which John has advocated for in op-ed pieces and elsewhere, as have others, we're in now a game of economic chicken. Who's going to blink first? Are the Iranians going to blink because, on top of all the weakness that we've discussed, they're now going to be losing their primary source of revenue? Or is the United States going to blink first because this is going to substantially increase the cost of oil and gas and many other critical inputs?
Well,
And you, as you said, we probably both bet on Trump blinking before he doesn't.
Yeah, if it depends on Trump's perseverance and resolve, we're screwed. But I think it will...
Kind of we're screwed.
But I think it will depend on the determination of the Gulf Arabs not to be subservient to Iran. And I think we can clear the Gulf. And the way this shapes up economically, if we do it right, is we blockade Iranian oil and Gulf Arab oil ships. And the price comes down internationally, and Iran's revenues have dried up.
But that assumes that Iran just sits there and takes it.
No. We're going to have to pound them some more, and they will try and fight back. But the point is, they have spent decades, as did Hamas. To me, I don't know which is the mirror image of which. In Hamas's case, building this incredible fortress tunnel system underneath Gaza while the people lived in poverty, and in Iran, building this capacity of asymmetric warfare and conventional warfare and nuclear weapons while the populace lived in poverty. This is the time to break it once and for all. And I think, notwithstanding earlier mistakes, if handled correctly, a big if in this case, that we can persevere. And I do think that it's time to think in kind of old-fashioned terms, victory.
Ambassador Rice, anything to add?
Yeah, I'm just curious what victory looks like.
The fall of the regime.
And then what? The fall of the regime and its replacement by an amenable government, or the fall of the regime and chaos and a failed state of 90 million people?
Well, if there is disarray, and I think there will be, I think that's the opportunity to take the nuclear materials out, because there wouldn't be any force strong enough to resist us. They would be worried about internally. I think if we were doing this correctly, the most benign outcome and a very foreseeable outcome is a military government by the conventional army, not by the Revolutionary Guard, but by the conventional military that could restore order and then give the Iranian people the chance to decide what sort of constitutional system they want going forward. This is not an issue of just replacing a group of leaders. The people obviously do not want the system of the Ayatollahs, and they're not going to get another system imposed on them from the outside. It's an educated, sophisticated population. They know they could have a different way of life. The young people especially, 2/3 of the population are under 30. They can see it across the Gulf. They know they don't have to live the way they do now.
We all would love to see the Iranian people be able to determine their own government. But how you get from here to there at an acceptable cost? It's like, look at Venezuela. Regime change there? Not really. Democratic opening, progress towards elections, allowing an opposition to compete, none of that is underway, and the administration has basically said that's not its priority. Its priority is extracting oil revenue.
Yeah, well, that's not my position. I mean, it's possible Trump thought Iran would be like Venezuela, and nobody bothered to tell him Iran wasn't like Venezuela. I think that's very likely. But in any event, Venezuela is not like Venezuela. There isn't regime change in Venezuela.
But do you think it's this? You
But
guys have
wouldn't-
skipped ahead to one of my questions. Do you think it's been a success, taking Maduro out of Venezuela?
Well, it's a success. It's a partial success, but the very fact of being able to accomplish it, I think, shows that we could have taken the whole regime down. And certainly in the case of Venezuela, we do have an alternative regime standing by. It's the democratically elected opposition, which Trump has kicked to the curb. And what you'll find, I think, is not hordes of American companies rushing to invest in what's still not a rule of law society, but Delcy Rodriguez and the gang of thugs who still run the country, entrenching themselves in power, counting on Trump's short attention span to turn somewhere else.
Correct, and that's what I worry about. When you say the military, not the ROGC, but the conventional military controlling Iran in an interim period, you know, I think, first of all, that would be hard to pull off. But if we could, prioritizing a democratic transition, as the people want and deserve, I'm very skeptical about, given how we have, as you said, blown off the opposition in Venezuela and forgotten any interest in a democratic outcome there.
Well, I think one difference in the Iranian case is there is a much larger Iranian diaspora that could come back into the country. I'm not talking about the son of the Shah. It's a mistake to try and pick the new government. That is one lesson from Iraq. It's going to be the people who are there plus the diaspora that can do it. I don't think there's any basis other than some kind of military government that would provide enough stability for that to happen. And that could take a number of years. It's not going to happen overnight.
I want to turn to another part of the world and a looming, probably the biggest problem for the U.S., which is China and our relationship with China. Can you talk a little bit about how you think the U.S. should be positioning itself when it comes to China? And then when it comes to Taiwan, how far should the U.S. go in the case of a Chinese invasion or attempted invasion in Taiwan? What should we be willing to do? I'll start with you, Ambassador Bolton.
Well, I think we should make clear that that we would not tolerate the use of military force against Taiwan. I think Japan would agree to do that with us. I think even South Korea would consider it. Strategic ambiguity worked for a long time, but it was devised by Henry Kissinger, and some of his successors were able to carry it forward. We're a little short on Henry Kissinger's these days. And I do think this is a case where being clear to Beijing that we wouldn't tolerate the use of military force can actually deter and reduce the prospects for it. I don't think the main threat is invasion of Taiwan. I think it's clear that what they would do would be to create some kind of political crisis by pretext and throw a blockade around the island and defy us to breach it. And right now, I'm not sure what the Trump administration would do. But I think if we lose Taiwan, even slowly to China, that all of East Asia and Southeast Asia are in real jeopardy, because our credibility would be shot beyond repair. So there's certainly a lot to do, and it's not on the top of my list to make a big trade deal with China, which is what I think the president's going to aim for in May. I don't know that he's paying attention to just how serious the problem is. In his first term, he used to sit behind the Resolute desk and take out a Sharpie pen and point to the tip of it and say, "See that? That's Taiwan." And then he'd point to the Resolute desk and say, "See that? That's China." That's not good news for Taiwan, but it should be his policy to defend the island and not give Xi Jinping the opportunity to make a grab for it. And you don't have to deter by convincing the Chinese you would be victorious. You only have to convince Xi that it's too risky for him, because if he tried and failed, that would be the end of his regime, I think.
China is our principal competitor and adversary, and we are making a hash of being optimally prepared to confront it. We are pulling military resources and capabilities out of the Pacific to mess around in the Middle East and in the Western Hemisphere, by the way. We are not competing in the technology race, particularly artificial intelligence, but also robotics and quantum, bioweapons and bio-capabilities in any rational or coherent way. Our trade policy is completely incoherent. It changes by the day. I agree with John that Trump wants just a trade deal with China that is probably going to prove detrimental to our interests. But at a time when we are in a race towards artificial general intelligence, we're going to give the Chinese the ability to purchase some of the most advanced chips that we have possession of. It is completely backwards and incoherent. We are retreating from the global stage, from the developing world and from international organizations, and leaving the field open for China. And I won't repeat my opening statement, but in so many ways, through our efforts to assail our alliances, from our retreat from international organizations and from any kind of development strategy, on and on, what we are doing is benefiting China, benefiting Russia, and strengthening their partnership to our detriment.
I want to turn to Russia and Ukraine. In 2021, I think it was, President Obama observed that no matter what the U.S. does, that Ukraine would be vulnerable to some type of military action by Russia.
Did you mean 2021?
Sorry?
You said 2021 and President Obama. Did you mean?
I think in an interview.
Okay.
Yes, but I will double check that. Don't quote me on that. But not while he was in office, no. And the observation was that it would be very difficult to, no matter what we do, it would be very difficult to prevent Russia from or some type of domination in Ukraine. I'm wondering if there is anything that we could have done to prevent such an invasion. And then generally as well, a lot of folks have been asking how afraid the U.S. should be of Russia and how we should be thinking about Russia right now. I'll start with you, Ambassador Rice.
Well, I largely agree with what John said in his opening statement. Successive administrations have failed to understand the nature of Russian revanchism and have not stood firmly quickly enough against Russian aggression. The one you left off your list, John, was Georgia in 2007 and 2008 under President Bush. That was the first Russian effort to bite off the territory of a neighbor. And then 2014 in Crimea and the Donbass, and now obviously again in 2022. And I think certainly before 2022, in an ideal world, the United States and our European allies would have put up a much more robust opposition to Russia through support to Ukraine. That was a mistake, in my judgment, in retrospect, that the Bush administration made and that the Obama administration made. I think by 2022, what we did do is what we should have done, but we should have done more of it, which is to provide robust military, financial, and other support to Ukraine, which did prove its capacity to substantially withstand an all-out Russian assault. And it is imperative, in my judgment, that the United States and our allies and partners enable Ukraine to continue to resist Russian aggression and raise the costs on Russia through sanctions, through military means, and the like. And we are failing to do that now.
Well, I think one thing that became clear after the second Russian invasion of Ukraine was that countries recognized that in Europe the only safe place to be is behind a NATO border, which is why Finland and Sweden abandoned 75 years of neutrality to become NATO members. But with respect to 2008, George W. Bush had already reached that conclusion, and that's why at the NATO summit in April of 2008 in Bucharest, he proposed bringing Ukraine and Georgia into NATO on a very fast-track basis. And you don't get many laboratory experiments, but when our good friends in France and Germany said, oh, no, we don't want to bring Ukraine and Georgia in on a fast-track basis, 4 months later, the Russians invaded Georgia. And the only surprise is it took them another 6 years to come after Ukraine. So it was, I think, a failure on the part of several U.S. administrations, despite enlarging NATO because it was in our interest to do so and it was in the interest of the new members. We never reached a clear conclusion what should be NATO's eastern border, and we created a zone of instability that the Russians have obviously taken advantage of.
And a very quick question just to wrap things up. Tomorrow, as of the last time I checked, just an hour and a half ago, Israel and Lebanon are still set to negotiate. First time that the countries have had direct negotiations since 1983. What should the U.S. role be in these negotiations, and what should the U.S. role be generally in their relationship? If you could both offer a brief answer, Ambassador Rice.
I think the United States has every interest in trying to end the fighting and the assault on the people of Lebanon. And, you know, if the best way to accomplish that, and probably is through constructive and fair mediation between Israel and Lebanon, then that would be great. I don't know whether that is our intent and whether that is the role we will play. And obviously, the challenge is that the Lebanese government does not control Hezbollah. But the fact of dialogue between the government of Lebanon and the government of Israel is a positive thing. If it's just a one-off and it's for show and it's so that, you know, there's a justification for continued aggression against, you know, Beirut and the people of Lebanon, not just, you know, Israel's border areas that are, you know, that are subjected to Hezbollah basing, then I don't think it will have accomplished anything.
Yeah, I think Susan's right. This is absolutely a critical moment for Lebanon, the government of Lebanon and Israel, to figure out how to work together. When we did 1701 in 2006, that was a great opportune moment too, and both the government of Lebanon and Israel failed to take it up. So if they can try it this time, this may be a way ultimately to disarm Hezbollah. It's been badly weakened. Iran's capability of supplying it has been even more weakened. Maybe this is the point of vulnerability, but it really does need Israel and the Lebanese government to do it together.
Well, thank you both. I'm going to invite everyone now. You should have gotten a text. Take stock of the conversation. Did you change your mind? You're able to reflect that in the poll that you've just received. So if everyone wants to take a moment to do that. And while you pull out your phones, I'm going to invite Ambassador Bolton to make his closing statement.
I was going to say, before they vote again, don't they want to hear our scintillating closing remarks?
Oh, yes, you can. It will remain open, so keep your minds open.
Well, probably not too scintillating, but look, I think there are larger issues here than what Trump's doing wrong. We could spend all night talking about that. I wouldn't even need Susan for help. But the real issue is what's been wrong with American foreign policy and American political leadership since victory in the Cold War. In 1991, people said, well, it's the end of history. We've got the peace dividend. Globalization will take care of everything. We really don't need to worry about geopolitics as we did in the past. And through both political parties, we've now had 35 years of a diminishing number of political leaders who even understand geopolitics, much less are able to articulate coherent policies that deal with the issues that confront the United States around the world. I think this is a terrible failing of our body politic. And yet, crisis after crisis, even the attacks of 9/11, which woke people up momentarily, seems to have been lost on us. And we have to learn, again, painfully, that if you don't think about American interest in the world and how a forward American presence helps maintain our economy and the kind of society we have here, and if you don't have political leaders who can explain to the American people why they need a big defense budget, why Reagan-era levels, 5 or 6% of GDP, are not going to cripple the economy. If you go back to the Eisenhower years, it was more like 8 and 10%, and yet the 1950s were a time of enormous economic growth in this country. We spend what we need to spend. Hopefully we spend it on the right things. That's why we have political leaders who should be more knowledgeable about all this. But this is a real problem for our country over these past 35 years. The end of the Soviet Union was not the end of our troubles overseas, and we're learning that, I think, to our enormous discomfort today. I think if you turn to the damages that Trump have done, and the list is extensive, they are nonetheless, so far, repairable. It would be much better if we didn't have to spend time repairing the damage, but what we need to do, wherever you are on the political spectrum, is grit our teeth in the meantime and try and minimize the damages that are done, and begin to think about ways of repairing them. We should not encourage the Europeans to say, well, you can't count on the United States, so we'll just find our own European mechanisms of defense. They will be insufficient for the foreseeable future. It would be a clear signal to the Russians after Ukraine that they would have an easy path across Europe. This is a time to understand that there will be another president elected in 2028. and it's important to think about that too. The closing point here is that Donald Trump notwithstanding, our capacities are enormous. And I would say, no matter how you feel about this administration, don't bet against the United States.
Well, let me end by where I began, thanking the Steamboat Institute, CU Boulder, Carine and John for a lively and fun and respectful debate. I certainly take many of Ambassador Bolton, John's points about the span of history and the fact that in the wake of the Cold War, U.S. leaders of successive administrations have made significant mistakes. But I would argue that what we are seeing now under the Trump administration is of a whole different order of magnitude, extremely comprehensive self-destruction. And it's deliberate. And it is foreign and domestic. And I believe the purpose, but I would at least argue the result, is that we will emerge from the second Trump administration not just battered and bruised as we did after the first, but in a profoundly weaker position. And I won't repeat everything, but let me just say this. John and I both agree that our network of alliances and partnerships is a core part of our strength and superpower. And it's hard to envision how simply the election of a new president will undo the damage that has been done. Now, whether Trump tries to formally withdraw from NATO or just weaken it by 1,000 cuts, the fundamental element that makes NATO work is trust and belief that we will be there for each other despite differences. And trust, once shattered, is extremely hard to repair. And just to remind you, some of you may recall, President Biden went to Europe early in his administration and declared, "America is back." And the Allies said, "For how long?" And now what do you think they're going to say? Because the best case scenario might be that we vacillate for years to come on a spectrum from believing in our alliances and partnerships to trying to destroy them. And that's just one of the ways in which I would argue the damage is considerable. I hope not irreparable. I love the United States of America. I believe in us. And the last line of my memoir, John, is that nobody's ever won by betting against the United States of America, and they shouldn't start now. So I believe that. Mind you, that was written in 2019. But I like to be an optimist. But I do think that what we're seeing at home is also extraordinarily hard to put back together. We are embarked on a march to authoritarianism that is very hard to undo. Not impossible. Look at what's just happened in Hungary, and they've got a ways to go, but they took the necessary first step. But when you appropriate the power of the state to one man or one family or one set, when you use the office to steal, as that I think is unique and unprecedented and detrimental and dangerous. And I hope very much that we are able to recover and rebuild and prove the ending of my book correct. Thank you.
Well, thank you both, and thanks for the respectful conversation. Thanks for everyone for joining and for voting and for sending in your excellent questions. We're going to pull up the results of the poll to see how people reacted. So pre-debate, you had 77% of people agreeing that the United States is in the process of committing superpower suicide, 9% disagreeing, 14% undecided. Now it is 75% agree, 13% disagree, and 11% are undecided. So there was some movement there.
So moderator, was there, I was having a little trouble seeing that. It's really, really close.
It is, it's close. Yep. So it went from 9% disagreeing to 13% disagreeing. So.
Okay.
I said before we started that I could only go down here. So I've succeeded.
So it looks like there was a small change to more to the negative position. Is that?
Yep.
Is
So
that
now
accurate?
13% disagree that the United States is in the process of committing superpower suicide.
But fantastic debate. Can we hear another round of applause for our speakers, moderator? If you would just indulge me for one more minute, I would also like to thank again the Benson Center for being such a great partner, the CU Conference on World Affairs. Thank you for having us as part of your event this week. Thank you also to the Adolph Coors Foundation, Bruce and Marcy Benson, and all of our wonderful supporters. If you enjoyed tonight's debate, remember Steamboat Institute is a nonprofit organization. We would love to have your financial support. Go to steamboatinstitute.org. Also, this debate will be available in its, yes. If you enjoyed this debate will be available in its entirety on Steamboat Institute's YouTube channel. We usually have these up within 24 to 48 hours. You can watch it for free, share it with others. We'll have lots of short clips out on social media for you to share. Please take 2 minutes to participate in our post-debate survey. You'll get on your phone. Tell us if we did well. Tell us how we can do better. We love your feedback. Thank you again for coming. We know you have many things you could do with your time, and we appreciate your sharing this evening with us.